Hello, I'm Daniel Jones. You are listening to The Best Games Period. I'm not Jack Gardner, and I'm not Jeremy Brown. I'm only about twice as good looking as the two of them combined, but I'm not either one of them, unfortunately. I am recording an honorable mention episode of The Best Games Period. We just had a little bit of a rough time getting together this week. We were trying to schedule with a guest who happens to be in a very different time zone than the rest of us, as in she's asleep when we normally record the show. So it was a bit difficult for us to do that. Hopefully we'll be able to get her on the show sometime soon. But either way, at least you guys have me today, for this episode, whenever you're listening to this. Tonight's honorable mention is going to cover a game that I think is pretty great, but doesn't get enough credit for it. I don't know that I would call it a best game period, but it's a game from a very well-known franchise that I think a lot of people probably consider one of the weaker games in the franchise. And as somebody who always likes the underdogs, I like this game. And it's called Halo ODST. Halo 3 ODST, I suppose you call it. I just call it Halo ODST. Because really, all the Halo games are kind of the same. Aren't they? Well, okay, so I'm pissing people off right off the bat. But really, the Halo games are very, very similar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think all of the Halo games are excellent. Because they're built on Halo. They're built on a foundation that is just about second to none in video games. And when your foundation's that solid, you don't have to change things up all that much, and that's why the series hasn't really changed since Halo 5, since the first Halo, all the way through Halo 5. I don't think Halo should suddenly start playing like Portal or Half-Life, although, I tend to like those games better. But I think there's ways that Halo could grow and change, and I think there's certainly a reason that Bungie stopped making Halo, but that's neither here or there. The reason I was kind of inspired to talk about Halo ODST tonight was because this past week I read a very fascinating oral history of Halo, the entire Halo series, by a guy named Steve Haskey on Waypoint. And it's excellent. If you have 6 hours, or you can cobble together about that length of time to sit down and read this thing, I highly recommend it. I had to read it in several sittings. It took me many days. But I got through it, and I thought the Halo ODST stuff was really interesting because the game started, a lot of people know that Halo ODST began life as the concept for a Halo 3 DLC. It was supposed to be kind of just an add-on with extra levels and new story content to Halo 3. And a lot of people still consider it to be just that, and I think that's part of where the bias against Halo 3 ODST comes from. I'm just going to start calling it ODST from now on, just so you know. I think a lot of people just have this preconceived notion that this was DLC and they just repackaged it to make it a bigger thing. And I think the truth is sort of in between. I think Microsoft did end up selling it at a full price point because they packaged in the multiplayer, but it also had the firefight mode, which was a complete new add-on, which was not something that had been in Halo 3, the base Halo 3, or any of the previous Halos. So that was cool. So I think what happened was, from the oral history actually, the team, Joe Staten, who had not been a team lead up to that point, but would go on to be a very important part of Bungie after ODST. He wanted to do something completely different. He wanted to write something completely out of the norm for Halo. And he started it as sort of a collaboration with Peter Jackson, which I thought was really interesting. I think that's new information. Bungie was going to make a Peter Jackson game. It was not necessarily a Halo game, but it was very noir, science fiction-y, really a lot of the same tone of ODST. And that fell through, and the movie fell through, the Halo movie. So their partnership with Peter Jackson just fell through. I don't think for any specific reason. Didn't seem like there was any animosity there. Just things happened, and business happened. So when that fell through, he had these ideas, he had these concepts, and the people he had been working with as concept artists and other people had these ideas, and they wanted to use them. And they kind of structured them into this story. He described it as he wanted it to be an everyman story. Instead of being about this super soldier like Master Chief, he wanted it to be about just a regular soldier. He, understands that soldiers are still soldiers, but he wanted it to be about a squad of regular soldiers. And he was very much inspired by Serenity, the movie Serenity, based on what is that show called? And I watched it on Fox, whatever. Everybody knows what that show is called. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Editor's note, it is called Firefly. You big dummy. Carrying on.
But anyway, he was inspired by the movie Serenity with Nathan Fillion, who ends up being in ODST, to make a game about a sort of ragtag group of characters. And I don't know that always comes across in ODST. It's still a Halo game. The story is hit and miss. But it's certainly a different tone for Halo, and I appreciated that very much. And so they wanted to make a noir-style game that didn't always have you fighting people. They described arguments where they talked about, people would play the game and say that they were going way too long without having any action happening. And they wanted Joe Staten and the rest of the team to change that. And I guess they really fought to not change that. To have those sequences where your character is just kind of wandering around the city looking for clues. And once in a while you run into patrols. But for the most part, those night sequences are pretty clear of enemies. So ODST takes place over an evening. You play as a kind of nameless character, the Rookie, who is on Earth in New Mombasa when the ship in Halo 2 takes off and heads to the new Halo. And when that ship takes off in orbit, like it did in Halo 2, what you don't see in Halo 2 is that it really did a number on the city. And these ODSTs were headed in to provide backup when suddenly the ship takes off. And so as they're headed in, the ship takes off, it creates this shockwave that knocks them all off course and flings them into different parts of the city. And as this Rookie wakes up 6 hours later, gets out of his pod, and starts to unravel the mystery of where they all are and where they went in the past 6 hours. And so as you pick up a clue in the game, you flash back and you inhabit the boots of one of those squad members, and you see what happens to them through their eyes. And it's super interesting. It's a really well told story. It's simple, and I mean that's a trick that movies and novels have used before, but it's not something that games had really done too often up to that point, especially not AAA games. And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate when games are ballsy enough to kind of let let the action breathe and let the player breathe for a minute and just take their time. It allows things to... there's a philosophy in music that was kind of pioneered by the indie rock band, the Pixies. And they're known for the mantra of loud, quiet, loud. And I think that's a really good way to pace a game. And ODST epitomizes that in a lot of ways and shows that it really does work. There are quiet moments, and then you flash back and you see what's going on with the crew, and all of those scenes are pretty action-packed, but they're also super varied. It has the most variety of any Halo campaign that I can think of. I mean, well, Reach has some pretty awesome variety, actually. But, there's stealth sequences, there's sniping sequences, there's the nighttime kind of detective sequences. There's tons of vehicle sequences that are all really fun. And there's, firefight, horde mode type sequences in the campaign, which is kind of a trope that video games have taken on in recent years that I don't like. But for whatever reason, in ODST, I kind of liked it. But I think it's kind of a cop-out now. But ODST does it just enough and utilizes it in a good way to just kind of complement the rest of the action and the way the rest of the campaign is structured, that it works. And those sections are fun. I can't think of a section in that game that I didn't enjoy. And that's almost one of the criticisms, if I'm going to criticize the game at all, one of the criticisms I would have of the campaign, and just to be clear, I'm going to be talking about the campaign most of the time. The multiplayer is pretty much just the Halo 3 multiplayer, and then the firefight mode is great, but I didn't play too much of it because they didn't have any kind of matchmaking, and I really only had a couple of friends who played this game at the time. So I don't have a ton of experience with the multiplayer, so I'm going to be talking about the campaign. So one of the problems with it is that it almost goes a little too smoothly. It's incredibly well paced, but it's also very linear in a way that Halo wasn't always. There's not a ton of spaces to just explore. You think of the first Halo, and you think of that first mission on the Halo, the second campaign mission, really. That mission, you have 3 areas of interest that you have to visit. And you typically you typically are guided in one direction to tackle them in sequence, but you don't have to. And there's a gigantic area in that game that you can just explore, and there is, like I said, a lot of room to breathe. And so within the action sequences in ODST, there's just less room to breathe, but they do make up for it in the other sequences where you're doing the detective stuff and you're kind of uncovering the story of what happened in the city. You're also you're reading Sadie's story, a really interesting flavor text that adds to just the tone of that game. It's kind of a tragic, kind of a sad little story about a girl trying to escape the city, and it's really great. The whole game is really great. So even when I try to criticize it, I end up coming back around and realizing that it works. It all works. It doesn't always feel like Halo. So if you compare it to the other Halos, sure, you're going to appreciate the freedom of the other Halo games a little bit more than you would ODST. So it is different in that way, but it's no less effective. It's just not quite the same. Also, the Silent Cartographer level from the first Halo, that's another fantastic example. To be honest, if I'm going to just straight up play my cards, lay them all out on the table, for my money, Halo Combat Evolved is the best Halo game, bar none. hands down, by far. But that's also because I'm coming at it strictly from a campaign perspective. Sure, the library is annoying. Fighting the Flood is sometimes annoying. But, poof, it makes up for it in so many other ways. It's worth dealing with the minor annoyances for all the other things that Halo 1 does so freaking well. So anyway, that's a best game period, by the way. Halo 1 is absolutely a best game period. We'll discuss it on the show at some point. This episode was almost going to be a Halo 1 episode where we discussed that, but instead you get me just talking about ODST. I don't know. I really liked ODST. I think if you ask me what my favorite Halo games are, Halo 1's going to be number 1, and oh my god, don't cringe so hard that you can't hear what I'm going to say right now. ODST is actually the second best Halo game of all time. So, there it is. It's absolutely a great game, no matter how you slice it. Even if you don't consider it one of the best Halo games, I still think you would probably consider it a great game. And just as a shooter, it does things that other shooters don't often do. Plus, it's Halo. I mean, there's just something special about Halo. Some of the things I learned in that oral history, like, I'm telling you, go read that freaking oral history on Waypoint. It's excellent. It's the kind of thing that I want to write sometime. If I ever have the time or resources to do something like that, I will consider my life a success if I'm able to do something as awesome as that oral history on Waypoint. But one of the things that I learned was the way that Bungie kind of balanced the aiming for consoles. It's fascinating. The way that they made it feel so natural is they had sort of I always knew that Halo had a bit of an aim assist, but it's crazy to hear them describe how it worked. They knew what enemy you were trying to aim at, and they just adjusted your cursor just enough so that you land your shots. It wasn't random, but there was definitely some stuff going on in the background that you just can't see if you're just playing the game. Super fascinating stuff. I know we have a Bungie tester who listens to the show regularly, and he's an awesome dude. We want to have him on the show sometime as well. So he's probably gonna have some things to say about this episode after he listens to it, but I'm not technically inclined, so I don't know exactly how they pulled off the magic that they did. But the way that Halo is structured, the 30 seconds of fun mantra, the way that game gives you options while also kind of restricting you just enough to make it so that it's not overcomplicated. It's incredibly well balanced and really amazing how they were able to pull it all off under the circumstances that they did. So ODST, to get back to that, it has all of that. It has all the great Halo gameplay. And let's talk about the story. Like, the story is just a fairly simple, like, intimate, personal story of this squad trying to survive something that they were totally unprepared for. You also see the Covenant just kind of freaking the heck out because they're no longer supposed to really be here. The war has moved beyond New Mombasa, and they're no longer in the thick of it. You see these characters just trying to survive and trying to get through. They're not really fighting the war anymore. They're just trying to survive. Now, some stuff happens. They do have some stuff going on that ends up becoming pretty important in the overall story of Halo. But for the most part, most of the game, they're just trying to survive. And it's it's a great change of pace. It's really nice to play a Halo game that's not about the super soldier and the end of the world as we know it, the end of the galaxy and universe or whatever as we know it, all human life, all life as we know it. It's really nice to not play a Halo game with weird ass shit like the Gravemind and the Covenant Council and the Brutes and the back and forth between the Brutes and the Elites, and it's just so much freaking garbage. And the Prometheans or Protheans or whatever they are, there's so much complicated baloney around the edges of the Halo series at this point. The Guardians, all this baggage, Cortana going rampant, which actually I think is one of the better storylines that Halo has ever introduced. I don't necessarily think they've capitalized on it or done enough with it, gone far enough with it. But it's pretty good. But there's none of that baloney in ODST. It's very straightforward. It is what it is. It's a survival story. And man, that doesn't happen enough in video games. It just doesn't. They always have to be about some epic struggle, some epic conflict. And while ODST doesn't completely escape that, for the most part, it does. Like, for the most part, it's not about that. It's about this squad of soldiers just trying to find each other and get out. That's it. And super good. Super freaking good. I don't know. I could go on and on about ODST, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just leave it at that. It's possibly a best games period, but for now it's definitely a best games period honorable mention. So, this is the part of the show where we talk about Extra Life. Extra Life is an awesome charity event. They have an event every year where you play video games and you raise money for the Children's Miracle Network hospitals. You can raise money all year long. You don't have to wait for the event. The event day is a lot of fun, but you can raise money all year long. You can go to extra-life.org for more details to sign up if you haven't signed up for Extra Life to raise money for the Children's Miracle Network. And yeah, I mean, Extra Life is freaking awesome. Extra Life is kind of what keeps us going. Like, keeps this show going and it ties us together. So we talk about Extra Life every week, but that's because it's far more important than any of the baloney that we do. So, Extra Life. Also, you can go to community.extra-life.org to find this show every Monday when we post it. You can also find the show on Game Informer, as well as on our Facebook page, facebook.com/bestgamesperiod, on Twitter, @bestgamesperiod. You can subscribe on iTunes. Just search The Best Games Period. You can also subscribe to us on SoundCloud and find the episodes there. You can rate us on SoundCloud and iTunes. That would be awesome if you did. And you can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. We deliver special bonus episodes to our Patreon supporters. Anybody who supports us with $1 or more per month, that's $1 a month less than supporting the Sarah McLaughlin MSPCA fund or whatever. Also less than, like, the dollar menu at McDonald's, because that's got taxes. Not to mention the dollar menu, like, does it even exist anymore? I'm pretty sure it's like the extra value menu, which is like $1.50, $2. That's not a dollar menu anymore. Nope, it's not. So, $1, which can buy you a whole bunch of new content of the best games period. Certainly sounds a heck of a lot more than $2 for a cheeseburger that might kill you. So support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. Next week, I promise, Jack and Jeremy, or one of the two, will be on the show with me to talk about something. Till then, I'll see you all on the flippity dippity. Yeah, right on it. Right on that flippity dippity. Up on that business. Just all over it. Just all over the flippity dippity. All up in that business. Flippity dippity doo dah.
You can't stop.